1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1. Saul lived for 1 year and then became king. And when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel, Saul chose 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent home, every man to his tent. Jonathan defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard it said that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become a stench to the Philistines. And the people were called out to join Saul at Gilgal. And the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. They came up and encamped in Michmash to the east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks and in tombs and in cisterns. And some Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people followed him, trembling. So we see the first mention of an actual official army. Up to this point, it's been kind of this militia group that's gathered together. And Saul, if you recall from the last week that we looked at, Saul gathered together by cutting up the oxen and sending out to all the people. And they said, if you don't respond to the help that's needed, then we're going to do this to all of your oxen as well. People responded well. They had 330,000 people respond. Huge group of people. I don't know how many Ammonites. It doesn't say how many Ammonites had seized that area. But it may have been an overkill, considering that the fact that this was a huge army that Saul had put together. But this is an actual official warfare which Saul himself has put together. Saul chose 3,000 men together, and now they're actually going against his greatest enemy. You notice that certain people have besetting sins. We refer to that term as, there's certain sins that may not be appealing to some people as they are to other people. And I think one of Saul's greatest weakness was the Philistines. I mean, he fought against the Ammonites pretty well. You had a lot of Ammonites come up, and especially in a fortified city, and Saul responds by just completely wiping them out, destroying them. They're scattered to and fro. Not even two people come together, and Saul just completely wiped them out with no problem. I mean, there's nothing as far as that causes them to stumble. But when it comes to the Philistines, Saul's a little bit more troubled by them. Maybe the Philistines were a little bit meaner than the Ammonites. They were. Maybe the Philistines were a little bit more powerful than the Ammonites. They probably were that as well. But overall, Saul was mostly afraid of them. That was Paul's besetting people. Or Saul's besetting people. And now Jonathan, which is his son, this is his first mention, he's mentioned on later. Jonathan actually goes to the garrison of the Philistines, and he actually defeats them. Now, Saul's response is that he blows a trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And the response is actually where the people say that they've heard it said that Saul is the one who defeated the Philistines. But Saul has kind of been a little bit slow to respond to the Philistines. Samuel mentioned him early on as far as in chapter 10, that this is a great threat. And Saul didn't seem as threatened by them, or maybe it was the fact that he was more afraid of them as opposed to the Ammonites. He doesn't respond too much to the Philistines, but Jonathan actually responded. He defeated a garrison. The rest of the Philistines hear about this, and so they start pulling an army together. And this is where Saul's a little bit afraid, it appears, and he starts to get a little bit more uneasy. Not so much with the Ammonites, not so much as the fact that the Philistines lived in the land, and he knew that he needed to wipe them out. They'd been on their backs, even all the way from Judges. Philistines were mighty people. It mentions in verse 5 that they had mustered up to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops, like the sand on the seashore, and multitude. Saul probably wasn't ready for this war. If anything, he wanted to allow himself time to prepare, maybe get up a bigger army, maybe get up to the point where they're more prepared, where they've trained some more. But Jonathan just kind of jumped the gun. He's like, we're just going to wipe out this garrison and we're going to get things started. Saul wasn't ready for that yet. Yeah. So they start gathering themselves together. They start this warfare. But before they were to really do this warfare, Samuel had instructed him that you're to have an offering. You're to have two offerings, a burnt offering and a peace offering that's done for the people. As could probably be as mentioned as early as chapter 10, or that could have been another event, which after Samuel had just anointed him, set him apart for service, he mentions of the Philistines, and then he mentions, you're to wait 7 days, and then I'm to give this offering, and then that's basically their blessing. The burnt offering is probably for sin, and then the peace offering, of course, is that God's blessing and peace is upon his people. You want to have the proper ritual that's done before you go into battle. Verse 8 of 1 Samuel chapter 13. He waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So he's waited 7 days. Samuel had told him to wait 7 days, and this is the appropriate time in which you're to wait. So Saul waited that 7 days. Gilgal is a very important area for them. That's where Saul was anointed, set apart, or heralded as king. But the people are starting to get uneasy. They're like, where is Samuel? I mean, we waited 7 days. Time has passed. He should be here by now. And not even just that. Just imagine for yourself that you have this great army that's active to defeat you. And you're waiting 7 days. 7 days is a long time to wait. I don't care how old you are. Waiting is hard. Waiting, being patient is one of the hardest virtues, or your characteristics and traits. And 7 days is a long time to wait while the Philistines are just sharpening their swords, ready to behead you. Now, when it gets to 7 days, that's probably especially when the people are becoming uneasy, because they were told by the prophet Samuel that this is when I'm going to come up. So you're to wait 7 days. I'm going to come up, and I will give the sacrifice. He did not give King Saul the proper blessing to give the sacrifice. Verse 9. So Saul said, because people were scattering, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. So Saul responds out of fear. He gets uneasy. He gets afraid of the fact that the Philistines are right here. And not only that, but my men are departing. They're starting to lose heart. I've listened as far as Samuel as much as I can. I've waited the 7 days. Why isn't the prophet Samuel coming? Did he lie to me? Did he get lost? Where is he? Now, this next verse is the common saying of, well, of course he comes now. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offerings. Notice the excuses that are starting to flow. I forced myself. I really didn't want to, Samuel. I really tried. I fought. The people were starting to scatter. I guess I just forced my hand to do it. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he had commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. And Samuel arose and went up from Gilgal. The rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the army. They went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the people who were present, and about 600 men. Saul acts very foolishly at this time. Saul has been up to this point a pretty decent king. He's shown humility by not destroying the people who did not submit to his authority, did not bring him a gift. He's done well in defeating the Ammonites, caring for his people. He's acted humbly and even going back to the farming of his family. But here in this act, he showed untrust. He showed a distrust and a discontentment within trusting in the Lord and in his power. Now the prophet Samuel told Saul not to offer the sacrifice, not until I have arrived, and not until I offer it. You're not to offer it, Saul. I'm the one to offer it, and then you'll be blessed for war. Following words can be sometimes easier said than being done. I mean, he's in the midst of this army, he's in the midst of this battle. 7 days have come up, and they're wondering where on earth is the prophet. He said he would be here. In fact, it would have been nice if he could have came a little bit earlier, because my men are starting to flee. Saul thought to himself in his reasoning, well, surely Samuel would be all right with this. I mean, if he comes up, surely I'll just explain, hey, buddy, you're late. I mean, 7 days are up, I don't know what kind of clock you got, but man, I'm losing men. You have to understand, I have a war that I need to fight. But that was Saul's problem, is he trusted more in his army than he did in God. He trusted more in his own power and in his own might than he did in the Lord. Now, what exactly it caused for Saul's wall of faith to fall apart, whether if it's taking brick out by brick or whether if it was already a problem within the foundation, I think it was probably already a problem with his foundation. He took out the Ammonites pretty easily, but when it came to the Philistines, it was a different story. When it came to the Philistines, fear struck his heart. There was something unique about them. And our enemy goes around prowling like a roaring lion. And he himself knows at times. He's been around on this earth for much longer than all of us here put together. And he knows how to push your buttons. And he knows the hooks to get into. One of my favorite passages about Jesus is in the Gospel of John. And Jesus is talking about himself being offered up and how he's overturning the forces of darkness. And he makes this amazing claim. He says, the enemy, darkness, has nothing in me. In other words, in the Greek, nothing to hook me with. I used to carry, I guess I still carry it around, this ridiculously long lanyard on my mini keys. And it's such a long lanyard that it gets caught on things very easily. And so I've learned through trial and error not to have it sticking out of my pocket most of the time, because it gets caught pretty easy and all kinds of disaster happens. Or when I wear a jacket and you have something that's loose and it gets caught really easy. Jesus says that he had nothing, no rings, nothing where the enemy could catch a hold of him. There's nothing at which Satan could have grabbed a hold and dragged him. Now our hope is that we become people with less and less of those hooks for Satan to grab a hold of. We have a weak point. We have something in which Satan knows that's a weak point. He tries to grab a hold of it, and slowly we cut off that weak point, and Satan doesn't have it anymore. He tries to grasp it. He tries to grasp it. I like to picture it like a wall, that you climb, and all of the marks, all of the walls, all the rocks that comes out, which you use to climb up, it's all inverted. It goes all inside, and you can't climb the wall like that. Unless you're Spider-Man, you just can't climb the wall that works that way. For Saul, his weakness was the Philistines. He did not want to offer to God something that was risky and costly of him. So, when life got to the best of him, when life started to get a little bit troublesome, Saul could have proclaimed that I am the Lord's anointed, that he would separate himself, that he'll follow after the Lord. But whenever it really came down to it, when it came down to trusting him in the battle, it became harder, right? It's easier for us to proclaim that God is our Lord while we're up on the very top of the hill and things are going well and things are going smooth. It's a lot more trying, it's a lot more enduring when we say it while we're in the valley, or we're in the hardest parts of our lives. That's the hard part. That's the test. For King Saul, that was his test, and he did not pass. He did not repent afterwards. That's one of the saddest things, right? After the prophet Samuel had come up to him and told him what he did, it wasn't as though he said, "You're right, I've done wrong. I repent, I shouldn't have done that." He offers an excuse. Well, I forced myself to. You don't understand, I was lost to him. I was losing men. Losing morale. That's a big morale killer. When your whole army's departing from you. Some say that the prophet, or the problem with Saul offering this offering is the fact that he wasn't a priest, and so he had no right to do this offering. Well, if that's the qualification, then Samuel doesn't have a right to do it either. Samuel is not a priest. Now, Samuel was raised in the house of the head priest Eli, and so he's very familiar with that. He seems to have some priestly functions here and there within this narrative of 1 Samuel. But there's still a distinction within his office. prophet, priest, and king. There's still a distinction there. Because in Numbers chapter 18, which most people will quote and say that it's the only place where only the priest can have official offerings. But that text isn't mentioning that priests can offer any offerings. It's actually mentioned about the tabernacle itself and about the altar. It says those people are no common Joe. It's just you can't have the altar and then just anybody's like, hey, I'll go up and do a barbecue or whatever. You can't have a common Joe just going up and offering something. I mean, it's forbidden because it's sacred. You just can't have a community bonfire upon the holy altar. So, that was to be separate. But there was no prohibition against these things, but they were to be done in order and in fashion. So Saul doing this, his sin wasn't that the fact that he wasn't a priest, and so for him offering this, it was forbidden, it was unlawful. It was the fact that it was untimely, and it was wrong because Samuel had told him not to do it. Samuel had told him that he himself would do the offering. And as a prophet in the Old Testament, when you said something, it was as if the Lord had said it. Your words and the Lord's were like mixed in together as the prophet of the Old Testament. And so when Samuel had told him, you're not to do this, it was disobeying the Lord. And he mentions that. He said, you disobeyed the word of the Lord by not waiting and you yourself doing the offerings. Saul had disobeyed. Faith is tough at times. Right? Let's be honest. I mean, there are days we get up, and honestly, we don't think that necessarily, church is not necessarily the first thing that comes to our mind. Or we may think that, it's just not necessarily that I have to, my first instinct is to go before the throne, to go to church, to do these things, but it's faith's instinct. Sometimes we have to pull ourselves up and to take those steps in faith. And faith is not always about what you currently see, right? It's not about what you're currently going through. Faith is about grasping what is to come next. I mean, there's an element, yes, there is, of what's currently going on, but it's also about pointing to forward, about pointing toward the future. In Hebrews 11, commonly known as the faith section, verse 1 and 2, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. People of old, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they have received their commendation. They have received their praise from God based upon the conviction of things that they had not seen. I mean, for God to tell Abraham, you're going to have an heir from your own blood that's going to produce more than the stars of all the heavens. Well, that's kind of hard to believe, especially at his old age. And he says, it's not going to be Eliezer. It's not going to be the servant of your house, but it's going to be your own blood. Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it is impossible to please him. It doesn't say that it's hard, that it's difficult, that you really kind of have to maneuver a way around. It says that it's impossible to please him without faith. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and he rewards those who seek him. I love that event. Remember this man, the disciples get them coming from the Mount of Transfiguration. And they come up to this crowd. There's this big crowd that's going around, and because the disciples that are left there, he only takes his inner three with him. And his disciples that are left there are trying to heal this demonized boy. This older man brings his son to him, and he says, to heal my boy because he's demon-possessed. He goes into the water to try and drown himself, and then he goes into the fire. And his disciples at the time couldn't cast out this demon. And the man looks at Jesus and he says, if you can heal him, please do so. He knows how long he's been suffering with this. The hardest thing probably for the man himself was knowing that it wasn't him that was demon possessed, but it was his child. And sometimes it would be easier, I can imagine, to go through the suffering yourself than to see someone else go through. Knowing that is what the suffering that his child, his son, had to go through. And he comes up to the one in which he knows there is hope. But I love the man's honesty because he's struggling with it. Right? Because the disciples that are there that said that they could heal, I mean, they kind of didn't. They were struggling. And Jesus comes up and he says, if you can heal, and Jesus says, if I can, all things are possible for the one who believes. And the man says that, he actually says that he shouts or exclaims, I believe, help my unbelief. I love that honesty. The man's like, Jesus, I know that you can do this. I believe, but please help the parts of me that doesn't. I believe, help where I'm struggling. Faith is about that grasp of something that's not quite there yet, but knowing that overall, the God is good. Paul mentions that in Romans 8, that nothing shall be able to separate us from the love of God. My own personal life, probably one of the hardest, troubling times that we've had to go through is when we felt God laid the burden on our heart to leave the church that we're pastoring at the time. And it was difficult for a number of reasons. And I'll be honest, for one of the reasons was because of the physicality of it. Because of the fact that, where's the money going to come from? I mean, it was a very good job. I mean, I got paid more than I've ever been paid in my life. And just thinking to the fact of where we were just struggling, just trying to figure out, God, we feel as though this is the burden that you're laying upon our hearts. Is this really you? Is this just us thinking of this, or what? So, God, I remember praying several times, God, open whatever doors you need to open and close whatever doors you need to close. And God is sometimes he can be very quick at responding to things. And so he made several doors very obvious that were starting to close, and some doors that needed to be open, he was making very obvious in there. And the step of being able to take from going to making that much to not having anything else planned, it's like in the cartoons where they walk you on the plank and on a pirate ship, and it kind of feels like that because when you get to the end of that plank, there's nothing there, and it kind of felt like that, there almost feels no sustainable ground underneath but water, and so you're just walking and keep hoping that plank just keeps getting longer and longer. But we knew that it was what God had called us to do, and so we stepped out in faith. And one of the things that I was reading a book at the time, and the author said, sometimes we rationalize everything to death. As Christians, sometimes we get to the point where we won't make a decision unless it's a 110% absolutely for certain. And the author said you can call that whatever you want, but it's not faith. I mean, I don't want to portray faith as just always irrational, just flying off the cuff. But I don't want to portray it also as the fact that sometimes God calls you to do something that the world sees as foolish. Sometimes God calls you to do something that even other Christians see as foolish. I don't know how many people tell me that was idiotic what we were doing. And so we did that, and at the day after I announced that, the head person of the board came up to me and he said, well, what is it going to take to keep you to stay? More money? We'll offer you more money. We'll offer you to try and find a parsonage. We'll supply that. Health insurance. What is it going to take? And I won't lie, that made the temptation go from about here to a little bit over a little bit more, because I was like, I'm kind of already making more than some of my professors were at the time at college and combined together. So it was hard to get to that point of where we didn't have anything else. And there was nothing else that people asked me, so do you have a job lined up after this? And I said, nope, sure don't. Trusting. And it wasn't like I wasn't applying or anything like that. So we were applying, and started to get more choosy as time went on. Started to get less choosy, as time went on, and just applying like a madman to everywhere. And there were weeks where it wasn't living paycheck by paycheck, but it was living the next paycheck, what should have been pushing bills behind, to the point, Amber doesn't like when you don't pay the bills. Amber will let you know, hey, you're back a couple days, and you do that a second time, and they'll make sure they really let you know these things. And I don't know if you know this or not, but it's expensive to live in Illinois.
Really?
It's expensive to live as it is, but especially in Illinois, amen. And so it was getting to the point where it was getting crunch time. We had I remember where there was a couple weeks where we had all our bills paid, or as much as we could. We had like $4 in the account, and we didn't have food. You remember that? Like a week or two. We just didn't have food. And we were blessed for the fact that we looked in the pantry, we made it work. Or we would get random checks in the mail, or someone would invite us out to dinner. And like, yeah, we'll take 12 of those burgers to go, or whatever. And it started to really become crunch time, because we looked at our financials and realized that if I don't get a job within this next couple weeks, that we're living out on the streets, or we're living with somebody or something. And God is good. He's extremely good. He opened up the door at just the right time for a job to come along. Not a great paying job, but it was a job, and it wasn't full time. It was part time at the time, but it was enough to get us by. And if I were to be taken, if someone were to come up to me with a time machine and say, hey, I could take you through that. I could take you bypass that, and you wouldn't have to go through that, and it would just be cozy for you the rest of that time. I wouldn't take it. Because going through that experience has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Amen.
It has taught me so much how to trust in God, in His power, in His provision, and it has increased my faith so much. And sometimes we need that increase. Sometimes we need that injection of increase, because it can be easy to say that we trust in God when there's maybe not there much reason to trust in God. John 16:33. I have said these things to you, that in me, talking about Jesus, you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Saul did not want to risk losing his men, losing this war, especially losing a life. But he did the easy route. He bypassed the hard part of trusting God. He waited long enough. May we not throw in the towel. Not throw in the towel of when we continue on the race of faith. That what God has called us to do, He will supply. And He will do it. I pray every day and have faith in the fact that God is going to fill these seats with new Christians. That the thing that I get most excited about is the thought that God is going to fill with new disciples. Right? This church was founded upon a hope of the belief, the faith in Jesus, that He is mighty, that He can do great things. Let's be that living testament of the fact that yes, He can. His hope is unfailing.